maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what for you is the core of your teaching and how you transmit that to people.
Well, let me start a little earlier. Let me start a little bit with, sharing that, because you say what's interesting right now is that I teach in longer programs, which is most of my work happens in longer programs. But in the beginning, when I first started, sitting for satsang, there was really just a very simple overflow of just the recognition, and just presence, and it was just, very natural and simple. And at some point, after, a couple of years or maybe a little more, something changed, and what I recognized was that people who have these amazing experiences while they were sitting in satsang, and it didn't necessarily translate into their life, right? Sometimes these experiences will take, so to speak, and they will hold. But often people will come back and they will say, well, it's not here anymore, right? Or
Yes.
it's not, you know what I mean? So eventually what I decided, and there were other reasons, other more personal reasons why I felt like I wanted to scale down, because I used to travel a lot and sit with a lot of people, and just really have more time for my own inner process also, right? Sitting with what is here. And through that and through my work with students, I recognized, that what's needed, there's some tools are needed for people. So that when we say, just be here, right?
Yeah.
That not everybody really knows what that means. Right? Not everybody knows, like, well, okay, just be here, but how do you do that, right? So over the years, first I started to develop different inquiry processes, different ways to point people back, and different ways to help them to address, what's really present. And eventually I realized, a longer program is the time I need to be with students, the time I need so we can really sit together. And it's not just about that moment, of like, wow, presence, that's great, wow, amazing, right? And then, well, what happens then, right? Like, how does that translate into one's life, right? How does it translate into a real, a real abidance, right? Rather than just a recognition of presence. So when you say, what is the core of the teaching, presence really is the core of the teaching, right? Recognizing our true nature. That's the core of the teaching, right? Yet, however, also it's like, can that recognition be present no matter what arises?
Yes.
Can that recognition be present in the midst of, the challenges that we have had here in the beginning, our technical, challenges, or can the recognition be present while we are, living our life and have different things going on? And can the recognition, can we truly recognize that everything is okay just the way it is, no matter what arises here, right?
Yeah.
And can I say some more, or do you?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Because oftentimes I also have seen that kind of a little more spiritual bypass, right? Like trying to, justify what's here by saying, well, everything, everything arises in presence, or everything is, but it's just more a mental, seeing it, a mental thinking it, and not the actual knowing in a moment that really, even when that is present, when we argue with our spouse, or when we go through our life challenges, or we have some health issues, or we have that, even in the midst of that, right, we can find that real, true deep sense of happiness and rest.
Yeah. And it's kind of perfect, but because here was a perfect example. I mean, you know, all these connection problems. First, you weren't in the right, weren't finding the right Google account, and then, you know, we had actually connected in a hangout, but we couldn't go public on that hangout.
Right, exactly.
It wasn't possible. So, so there was some kind of high adrenaline moment, certainly for me, maybe not for you. But
well, it's not really that there wouldn't be an adrenaline moment, because we are in the body, and that means there would be an adrenaline moment, right? But in a moment, what is it that we trust? What is it that you trust, right? The past is going to arise. There is no question about it. It's going to happen, you know, and the body is going to respond and react. But what do we trust in the moment? Do we trust in knowing, you know, that everything is okay the way it is, right?
Yes.
Or do we just go with the, you know, and get lost in that, right?
Yes.
So, of course, it's going to arise.
Yes. And you know, resting, it speaks so deeply to me, because resting really is, I mean, that is the deepest. I don't even know how to say this, but there's something, you know, just the word resting seems very truthful in terms of capturing what it is to not just be swayed by what happens, for there to be you know, it's sometimes called a ground of being, or, you know, we can call it presence. I mean, to me, it often feels like, or seems to have that taste of love, and resting in this just is such a, so hard to put words on it, but it's such a truthful way of being. So feel free to comment on that, Neelam.
Yeah, so of course. And what I find is, you know, what I find is that when tendencies are present, when past is here, because that rest that you speak about so beautifully, you know, that's our true nature. That's always here, and that doesn't really move. However, we are not always resting in the awareness of that.
Yeah.
We're always resting in the awareness of that. And so when past arises, you know, it sometimes looks like, you know, we will need a minute, you know, to just come to rest. And maybe we'll need a day, you know, and maybe we'll need a month, and maybe we'll need a lifetime, right? Or maybe we'll need to come back to this over and over and over again, right? Until we really recognize, right, that what we know in these moments of stillness, you know, which is, you know, we know it here now sitting together, right? And I'm sure there's many other times that you know it, or that everybody knows it. And yet there's these other times when it's just like, you know, what happened to that, right? So we can come and meet what has been arising. We can come and meet what has arisen, and we can be with that, right? Until in the midst of it, right, we recognize that true state, you know, because it really doesn't matter what we call it, right? Ground of being, presence, you know. I just happen to use that word right now, presence. You know, is to call it different things, you know, but it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what we call it, but then we really find in the midst of it, you know, yeah, it's right here, you know, it didn't go anywhere. The going of it is the illusion, right? The going of it is the imagination.
Yes. And I mean, just to be clear, sometimes, especially people maybe who are newer to all of this, they think that they have to be in restful states all the time, and that's obviously not what we're talking about. I mean, the rest is just at a totally different level. And sometimes it also expresses, and often it expresses in a kind of sense of resting and trusting whatever it is that is here. But, I don't know whether I lost it or I didn't lose it, but I was certainly, my mind earlier on was very focused on trying to get these problems solved.
Right. And yet then naturally you return back to rest, right?
Yeah.
Naturally, eventually you return back to rest. And I make this distinction because that's true what you are saying. That's right. First of all, when we say rest, it's not a state of physical rest, right? Mm-hmm. When we are at rest, is the inner state, right? So we can be in movement, we can be in activity, we can be doing stuff, we can be working on computers, we can be, living in life, and yet that sense of truth or rest or presence is right here. Right? It doesn't really take much for you. It didn't take much for you to come back and just know it, right? In this situation earlier. But sometimes we have these tendencies arise that seem to make it look like it's not there. They seem to make it look like, yes, the truth is present everywhere but here. Right? And when that arises, and when we are caught in it, and when we are in action, believing it, you see, that's very different than just being in activity, because in activity, of course, nobody expects that there is some perfect, as you're saying, recognition of presence going on all the time while we are doing everything, right? But there's most of the time no challenge with knowing it, right? Whenever you bring your attention, here it is, right? But there are certain tendencies. When they arise, it looks like. And see, the challenge with tendencies is that a lot of the times we are not even aware that that's what they are. Mm-hmm. We are not even aware of it because they remain dormant for a long time. They only arise when certain circumstances are present. When they arise, they seem to be very powerful and forceful, and we feel like, whoa, what did just happen, right? Mm-hmm. And then they subside again into not being seen. And when that happens, it looks like, oh, it's gone, it's over, right? However, that tendency is still here. It just kind of through its action, it has recharged itself. And by doing this, it stores a certain momentum for the future, right? Because when we talk about freedom, when we say freedom, I'm not talking about some, perfect state, right? I'm not talking about some imaginary state, let's put it this way. Mm-hmm. I'm speaking about a true independence in the moment, right? When past arises, is there in that moment, you see, a true independence and true recognition that that's what it is, you see. Yeah. That's what it is, so that our actions, our interactions, don't happen from there, right? Because when they happen, that just perpetuates suffering, and then ultimately creates more suffering and creates more momentum for that past as well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I totally agree, and it's interesting because as a psychologist and as a therapist, that's what I work with people about, is exactly those kinds of patterns that keep them trapped. And the normal psychological way is to replace those patterns with better patterns. And that's obviously not what we're talking about. I mean,
exactly, because that's another strategy, right?
yes, yes. So what I'm interested in is that the power of awareness, you know, when we bring awareness, when we are willing to just be totally present to what arises. So maybe you could tell us about how you see that. You know, it's almost like an alchemical process that changes something in that pattern.
You know what I really, because you know I'm very interested in how to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my work is about how to do it, because that's what I also realized. You know, even sitting with Papaji, you know, which was just the most amazing and the most blessed, you know, meeting in this life.
Yeah.
And I have to take a moment here because you know, just mentioning that, you know, so.
Yes.
Yeah, and even sitting there in this, you know, amazing grace and this amazing presence, you know, I would, for some reason, through grace in this body, there was some awareness of how to. Maybe not great awareness, but some awareness of what it means then to go home and actually sit with or be present to what arises. But that wasn't necessarily my experience of everybody, right, who was there. You know, some people would know that and some people just didn't. And of course, Papaji's grace was so strong that they would cut through it, right? It would cut through it. It would bring people to stillness no matter what, right? However, then later on, there will be like, well, you know, like if there was a step missing, you know, how do you do that, right? What is the tool? So when I work with people, I'm really interested in, you know, helping people to learn how to do that.
Yeah.
And I go a lot through the sensation of the body. Because we all know, you know, the mental, you know, body is so fast and so quick, and it can produce, you know, thousands of thoughts in a second, and so very unreliable source of information, right?
Yes.
Then we come to the emotional, and even though emotional and especially feeling, it's already much closer to our true nature, right? But it's very volatile, you know, like we start on the emotion and before we know we are back in another story. And then we get into the body, and it's, you know, these body sensations, they are still not permanent, right? That means they are still changeable. They are still going to go through whatever the change, but they are much slower, right? It's much slower. So we can use them to bring our attention. See, because the whole thing is how to meet the state that is present, right? We try to meet it by thinking about it. Oh my God, this is happening. Or we try to meet it by feeling it, right? But when we bring our sensation, our attention more to the sensation of the body, we can become more aware of what is actually the present time experience. You see, what is actually here? Like not by our thinking, not by our, you know, feeling, not by our imagining, and not even necessarily right away by going into presence, which that, you know, it's either naturally we drop into presence, or if we have to go there, that's just another, you know, thing to do, right? Yeah. So can we meet that state that is present here and that manifests so much more closely when we become aware of the sensations in the body, right? Can we meet that? And can we become aware of that? Because when we are aware of it, something changes, you see. Instantaneously, right? We begin to, in that level of honesty, we begin to return back to our true nature. Yeah. We begin to come out of whatever the contraction of the past is, right? Because all of it goes through the body. You see, that's what we have: body, nervous system, brain, right? That's the instrument we have. So pointing people towards the sensation in the body, and of course by now there's a whole, inquiry process that I teach, that I do, that helps. That there's many elements to that, but the sensation of the body is I would say the core of how to meet, right? How to meet what is here.
Mm-hmm. So, Neelam, and I just want to thank you because, just in taking that moment of stillness when we were talking about Papaji, that's a beautiful transmission of that silence. Thank you. And I'm wondering, would you be willing to just do a guided how-to right now with us? Since we're right there, most people have caught up with us.
Okay, so
they're with us. So
would you be also participating, because it would be a little easier for me to just kind of
absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, I would be right there with you too.
Okay.
I'd be the guinea pig.
So, if we want to, what is inquiry? Let me just say, inquiry means to direct our attention, to change the direction of our looking. Rather than looking out into senses or thoughts or feelings, we look in, right? That's what inquiry really is, right? And we do inquiry when suffering is present. We don't do inquiry when we are at rest. That's not necessary, right? When the state is here, nobody needs to do inquiry. When past arises that holds our attention, that grabs our attention, and we seem to be lost in it and suffering, right? That's the time that needs inquiry, right? So this is just, Did you want to say something?
I'm thinking, well, my sense is that, it doesn't have to be full-scale suffering, but bodies often hold like just habitual background tension that that doesn't allow the person, the being, to be fully in presence. Because whenever we get into some kind of egoic, well, whatever functioning has to be there, that subtle, very subtle tension often arises with it too. So my sense is that even when there isn't full-scale suffering, it's still worth inquiring because that's more subtle.
Right. When I say suffering, I have a very simple definition of it, which is suffering means an inability to be here. You see.
Okay, perfect.
So it could be anything, right? It could be what you're speaking about, very subtle. It could be a full-blown story, But when I say suffering means in a moment, an inability to just be here, right? Just be here. But the reason I'm saying all that, because when we do a process together like this, where I can't really support people more in person, I try to do it so that we, on a scale from 1 to 10, take something that is maybe at 4 on the scale of what causes that disturbance. So we don't go into the most, challenging stuff together right now, right? That we just kind of do like a 3 or 4 on the scale of 1 to 10 of where our attention gets caught. What's our favorite kind of story of the moment? What's our favorite pattern where we tend to believe it and at the same time maybe not the most challenging one, right? So I would invite everybody to look for something like that right now. Something that takes our attention away, but it's not totally, a 10, but it does take our attention away. We struggle with it when it happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I hope now, I'm just including everybody here right now and saying, I hope we all have that. Do you have that, Grace, right now? Something to look at? Yeah.
Yes, I can just take the I can just take the kind of, there's still a kind of physical slight tension from the initial
Beautiful.
connection problem. So that'll be my thing.
Lovely, lovely. Beautiful. So this, in the process of inquiry, which I'm not going to be able to do it like just perfectly, like it takes me some weeks to teach that process, but we'll just do the best we can. So, while we sit here, I first want to invite everybody just for a moment of presence, just for a moment of inner stillness, whatever it is that we are going to look at, that's fine. But let's just take a moment. Just take a moment of presence here. Beautiful. And normally when I would be doing this live on the phone, I would ask everybody to speak what it is that's going on. Because speaking, when it's not really going into the story that much, really helps us to get in touch with what is present. So maybe everybody in the stillness of their home and can just say a few words about this, um, you know, um, situation, like what is it that we are looking at? What is it that catches our attention? Beautiful, beautiful. And then I would say, let's notice what are the sensations that are present in your body. When you think about that, when you speak about that, when you are, in touch with that, then, what are the sensations that are present in your body? And here I want everybody to be very, very practical, because sometimes we have a tendency to slip into silence, which is a little deeper state than awareness of sensation. So we want to just really actually sense the body and just say, okay, here it is, these are the sensations. Right? Beautiful, beautiful, because we need that awareness here, right? And then, I work with this question and I ask, and I would like you to ask yourself and everybody right now to ask themselves, the way these sensations are right now, is that okay? What do you say, Grace? Let's take this example, because normally I would ask everybody, like, this is really, there is no right answer for that question. This is an inner question, like, am I really truly okay with this experience the way it's happening right now? Is that really okay right now? What would you say?
Well, for me, the focus of the attention was in the chest, and I noticed that the breathing was not full. So there was just a natural breathing more fully. And with that, a realization that there's an old pattern of, trying to do things well and getting freaked out when they're not working.
Beautiful.
And
yes.
being kind of publicly exposed for things not working is like, that's an old kind of
Beautiful.
stimulus that's there.
Lovely. And so that's a very spontaneous inquiry. Just by sitting and really bringing your attention to the very experience. Not, see, because we could have gone into silence too, right? But just saying, hey, let's be with it where it is. Beautiful awareness, right? Like,
actually, that was a good catch, Neelam, because I was just going into silence. So
exactly, because it's so easy, right? It's like so nice. People love to hang out in it, you know what I mean? So
it's so yummy, but in calling me back to the physical sensations, I actually, in a way, it was more productive or more juicy, because that's where the tension was, and that's also where the story was held.
Beautiful, beautiful. So that means now your body and mind, and I will go to the inquiry in a moment, but now your body and mind is really coming into alignment with that state that is really the ground, right? State that you are obviously aware of, and the state that is obviously part of your recognition. Right? Now your body and mind is coming into alignment with that. It's just saying, oh, okay, well, there will be some, tendencies running and contractions and fears and whatever, but you're seeing. That's what's so powerful, right? That you can see and say, whoa, wow, that's a tendency, right? That's like a habit of, it's very powerful. It's beautiful. Right?
Yeah.
So that could be what's happening for everybody, or it could be that we are in the simplicity of that question. Yes. Is it okay? And the answer, well, it is or it isn't. And if we would say, if the answer comes, yeah, that's okay, then I would say, okay, let's just be here. Let's just really, really notice that okay.
Yes, and in that simple being here and it being okay, there's a freeing that happens, there's an opening that happens.
And also not everybody would have the recognition that you already have, right? So not everybody will be having that, you know what I mean? So sometimes we need that that preliminary step that says, are you okay? Let me see. Oh, see, which means look inside, right? Look within. Look within, right? Oh, so if it's yes, beautiful, that release happens. If it's no, because that happens too. These are our, this is our human, ancestral, animal, collective, whatever we call this conditioning.
Yeah.
So if it says no, then I would say, can we be present in that sensation of that? What kind of sensation is that now? Where does it arise in the body? Beautiful, because no matter which way we go, we end up coming back into presence, right? Yes, beautiful. I feel the feedback coming from the inquiry that is happening right now. I can just feel that. It's beautiful, beautiful. Everybody is recognizing that. Right?
Yes,
we can be here. We can be here.
Yes, and Neelam, it's such a precious gift. To realize that right here, right now, not just to talk about it, but actually
of course.
in that realization. That's why I asked you for a guided exercise, because there is nothing like actually being in it, doing it, feeling the opening that happens. Seeing the results. I mean, that's the beauty of the how-tos, is that it does.
That's why we do it, because that's why I also do it often on the calls. I just say, okay, let's do a process of inquiry together. And I wanted to say something about the question, is it okay? Because what I find is that question, when it's asked very directly and straightforwardly, and not into the mental, but real inner question. that it clarifies our relationship with what is. That you see, we could do a lot of different processes, including inquiry. And we would do it, and it would work a little bit, and then it wouldn't work, and then it would work, but it wouldn't cut to this core of like, where are you at? See?
Yes.
Are you really, really, really at rest with what is here? Let's clarify that first, right?
Yes.
Or are you in resistance with it, which is okay, but let's just be in resistance then. Let's sense that, because that's how we are coming out of these, millions of years, thousands of years of conditioning of like, oh, that's not okay, we can't be like that, that shouldn't be here. It's not an okay experience, but here it is, so that's what we have, right? Can we just be
Yes, it's beautiful, Neelam, because my sense is that really undercuts the spiritual bypassing, and I know that in my own in the deepening of my own awakening, at some moment I had to realize that all this spiritual searching and inquiry and whatever I was doing, meditation, there was a fundamental escape from life and reality that drove it. I mean, not all of it, it was also truthful, but it was also a way of not being in the present. And so, having ways of undercutting that, bypassing that, using spirituality as a way of escaping from being here.
Exactly.
Really precious.
Yeah, because the moment, see what we can bypass with anything, right? And the moment we are reaching for the spiritual state, that's still reaching for something. Why isn't it here? What's with it that it's not here right now, right? Why do we have to think like, let's go to silence, let's be quiet, or quiet is here, quiet is our true nature. It's the substratum, is the foundation of everything, right? You don't have to go anywhere. It's here, right here we are. So.
Yes. And actually, in that way, doing that kind of inquiry is a way of stopping. It's a way of stopping resistance.
Of course, yes.
So it's actually Papaji's teaching, but kind of made very concrete and very practical.
Exactly, I like it very practical. See, in the beginning when I was teaching, satsang was really new,
Yes.
It was still really new, and so wherever I went, it was like, wow, it's so new. And then after like 2 years or 3 years, what I realized is the lingo set in, the language of satsang. And I would go, and people will speak the language, but they would not be really, really backed up or covered by their true experience, right? And that's why there was one of the reasons why I felt to move away from that, right? And find a way to express it that is maybe more direct in addressing that, right? And not just, because, in the beginning when I was teaching, the words were Papaji's words naturally. They were just the flow and overflow, right? And then eventually that kind of disappeared. And there was a need to really very directly address, like, hey, where are you? Right now, like, what's going on, right? Are you at rest or are you suffering, right? This is this moment, So you're right, it's a very, very direct. It's just made very, very practical too.
And in that practicality, it meets people where their need is at, because it meets people at the level that's driving the spiritual searching.
Exactly. Beautiful. I love that, because so often we seek because we want to move away from what is. We say, well, that's not good, let's have something better. And, it doesn't work like that, right? Luckily, it doesn't, It can work for a little bit, You know, it's nice for a little bit, but then eventually we are always back to this, and that is what we need to address, really.
And you know, that it's just like that beautiful discovery that this that we've always wanted to get away from is actually just perfect. It's just fine.
Exactly. It's just present, right? It's really
there's
present.
nothing wrong with it if we don't resist it.
Exactly. If we know how to, because see, this is also the human conditioning, right? The human conditioning that the body is really animal in origin, so we carry parts of our brain, are, you know, the reptilian brain and the deeper instinctual, you know, so that's part of it, right? That's the whole kind of life on earth thing, right? So we carry all that, and you know, and that's meeting of that is really stopping, you know, really stopping that, you know, movement that is so deep, you know, in the even in the structure of the body, right? The structure of the brain, the nervous system, that instinctual, you know, and it's like, whoa, let's just stop, you know, let's stop. Let's stop even here.
Well, you know, in my intuitive understanding of it, it's like because we have, you know, animals have the power of movement, can actually run away from things that are scary or that don't feel right. Or they can move towards things. It's like that's because we have that power just as animals do. It sets us up to continuously move away from things and towards things. I mean, it sets us up to search.
Right, but which is really the condition of embodiment, right? Like, to even be in the body, that means tendencies that brought us here. To even take birth, that means there's an unconscious belief and identification with a notion that there's something in the future that is going to bring us fulfillment, right? So that itself, even just being in the body, means that misunderstanding that there's something that is, you know, that is going to happen at some time, right? So really investigating that misunderstanding, you know, meeting that. That's why I'm so interested, you know, when we sit in longer programs, going back to that, you know, I have more of an opportunity to really address that with people. I have more of an opportunity to really, for people to really see like, oh, that's how it moves here, which is so often obscured, you know what I mean? It's obscured by the surface things, how they are happening. And we kind of don't see this very core tendency, you know, which is a real movement away from our true nature, you know, even when the recognition is here.
Yeah.
It's still, you know, that still oftentimes remains functional. So.
Yeah. And you know, to me, that's also incredibly healing when these tendencies can be seen and can be loosened and ultimately freed, if possible, you know.
For sure.
But there is just you know, there's something about, I don't know, there's something about human life that just yearns for healing of all that suffering. And so when we address the things that cause suffering in our lives, I mean, it's just like, you know, my sense is that leads to a discovery of resting in being that's very embodied, you know, that's very real in a human sense.
Yeah, very embodied, very real, and also the recognition that there's only one cause of suffering. That everything that is going on that we see and go like, oh, really, this, you know, that in the background of that, there's the same movement. That's the movement away from our true nature.
Yeah.
And that in this, as you say, in this, you know, being with, in this process, yes, we come into this greater and greater embodiment, which means we move, you know, there's no more like, well, this is spiritual and this, you know, we move as a whole, right?
Yeah.
Everything is here. And not only we move as a whole, but that influences everything and everybody too, right?
Mm.
Like every time we are in the stillness of our true nature, that affects everything. Right?
Yes.
Every time we are in a true recognition that everything is okay the way it is, that affects everything too. So there is a greater momentum for everything and everybody to come into this embodiment that, it really is. We don't have to really search for anything. We can really just find it here, right?
Yes, totally. It's just such a beautiful movement where the individual level feeds into the collective level, and collectively waking up is just so much more available now than it was 20, 30 years ago, just because so many have contributed their awakening and their insights and their presence to the collective consciousness.
For sure. So do you think we'll have some time for questions? Are people interested in asking some questions, or how's
Yes, let's check, Neelam. That's a good place to check. Now, I had to close down some windows, so it'll take me just a little time to check about questions.
If there are any, because that's always interesting. It also makes it more practical again, so.
Yes, absolutely. So if people have questions, now is the time to ask the question. And you can post it on the YouTube comment. I'm not quite sure, since everything's different right now. It's either to the left of the actual image, the video image, the live broadcasting image, or it's below. But on either of those two places, you will find the YouTube comment thread, and you can post your comments or questions just as you wish. And I'm just going to see what's actually, whether there are any questions yet. So I will just take a minute, Neelam.
Yeah, it's great because I'm learning. I've never done this like this live before, and so it's very interesting just to see, the process and what it takes and all that.
Yeah. We'll find the YouTube comment. Okay, so Ed Ward has a comment. He says, they make it sound so easy in the Hangouts how to.
It is easy, Edward. It is.
It is in principle, but when Mercury is retrograde, it's not so obvious. So Ed also comments, I have the pattern that if I stay in the present, I will miss something. I hear you saying to trust that being aware or in the moment will mean I miss less than following my pattern.
Well, can I say something about it?
Yes, go ahead.
That it's not just yours, Ed. It's not just yours. That if I'm going to stay in the present and I'm going to miss something, that's really the definition of the past. Right? How the past survives is by telling us a story that there's something other than this moment, right, which is called the future. So, this is just what the past itself tells us that. So it's not so much that you will get more, or it's going to be better, or it's going to be, or whatever, if you stay in the present. But what I really would like you to see is that that's the hook, And every time that hook arises, if you follow that, you end up in the same place. And that place is a place of looking for fulfillment in the future and therefore suffering. And it's the same place that takes us from life to life to life. Takes us from incarnation to incarnation to incarnation. So it's not so much what you will gain here, it's about, oh, that thought is the past, you see. And then the question is, can you be here? Can you take a moment, to just sit here, and be here. Take a breath or whatever happens and just see what's present, what happens in the body when you actually, beautiful, when you actually slow down for a moment. Yeah, beautiful, because that's what you really want, right? In that moment of slowing down, something happens, you see. And what happens is that we disconnect from that pursuit, It's just a moment of like, oh, here. And that may be a tiny little taste, or it may be, all that you need. It doesn't matter, right? But in that moment that you are able to be here, you can see, wow, you can just be here. Nothing is needed for that, right? You don't have to do anything. You don't have to go anywhere. You can, but you don't have to. Right? It's not, it's not an emergency. It's not a need. It's not a real, need.
Great.
Good,
Thank
good.
you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So there's another question from Sebastian.
Okay.
So with the exercise we started, would there be a continuation of being with the physical sensation into deeper rest, or a way of letting the sensations evolve?
So if we got to the level of sensation and we ask, is it okay? You see, that's why I teach this in a progression over a period of time, because mentally we get it very quickly. Experientially, it takes time, right? We need to learn that experientially. So when we sit with the sensation, for now, for the simplicity, let's let go of the question, is it okay or not? Let's just notice the sensation. And when you sit with the sensation, Sebastian, when you sit with the sensation, you just allow the sensation to be here, for a moment. Bring your attention to it. It's nothing special, just kind of aware of it, right? Then what happens in that moment when you do that? What happens? Would you be able to tell us? What happens?
Neelam, I'm not sure that he can come back immediately.
I understand.
Because there's a certain delay in the comment page.
There are two things that can happen. Either the sensation is going to intensify, and sometimes it intensifies because we haven't been paying attention, and so at first it's going to grow stronger. That might be, of concern, but please don't be concerned, because it will eventually subside, right? Or it begins to subside. And that's what we are looking for. We are not trying to force anything or make anything. We are looking for it to naturally change, right? And if it begins to subside, then that's what we go with. That's the natural rest. And here, once we come here, hang out in it, however long you want. That's actually the point of it, right? The point of this exercise is not to do it. The point of the exercise is to come to a place in which naturally rest happens. Right? So then let's just stay and be at rest, right? Let's just stay here.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, Ed thanks you for sharing what you shared in response to this.
Thank you, beautiful. Yes.
And there's Maya, who says, "Hi Neelam, I haven't seen you in years, and it's so beautiful to see you here.
Beautiful.
Over the last couple of years, I've had some health challenges, and at the same time felt disconnected and in suffering around it all. With depleted energy, overall not feeling well, though I'm better now than before, it seems so much harder to be in touch with what arises. How to do this when it is so much harder than before, when it was relatively easy to go right in? Love."
Yeah, sweetheart. I just wish I could see you, in person or talk to you more in a more direct way, even though that's direct too, but just to be able to embrace that more or address it more, but well, first, we before we even go to inquiry or anything, when these kinds of challenges are present, I would say we need to begin with the acceptance of the state that you are in. So whatever it is, sweetheart, whatever it is, if that means less energy, if that means, it's not so easy to be present, if that means, inquiry is not happening like as naturally as it was before, any of these things, can we just first begin with a gentle, kind, tender acceptance of that? And because when you say, it was easier, I would say throw that out. That's irrelevant. It's unimportant. It's not necessary. That's not here anymore. That is what's going to cause suffering. Right? What we have right now is what we have, whatever it is. And in meeting that state where you are, even if you could never do inquiry again, which I don't think is going to happen, right? But even if it meant you were never going to be doing inquiry, I would say the acceptance of the state is enough. Right? That's the beginning, because that's present, you see. That's being present. Right? And so if you are listening to it right now, Maya, sweetheart, notice the sensations of your body, take a moment. Notice the sensation. Beautiful, beautiful. And can you just hang out in that? Can you just be present to that? Lovely. Because that's all we need, you see, and especially if there are health challenges present or other strong challenges, we really need, we need kindness no matter what. But this is in particular, we need kindness, you see. That's often where our conditioning is so, turned around. The more there is the need for kindness, the less kindness there is, right? Like, the more harshness comes up, and that's the past. And we just need to start like, okay, that's all we have right now. We don't have anything else. You see, that's where you are. That's good enough, that's where you
are. Can I chime in on that, Neelam?
Please.
It's interesting you put that in terms of past, because really, yes, I realize there is a comparison that's happening between what is now and what used to be.
Of course.
And when there's a difficulty in the present, there's the comparison serves as a reason to try and control the present.
Of course.
And that's what brings in the harshness and the self-blame often also, you know, that's like either we are to blame for this or somebody else is. And so that stands in the way of simply just being here with what is here now.
And usually these tendencies of harshness are already there prior to this. Right?
Yes.
They are already our deeper, we can say this life or ancestral or whatever, you know, lines of conditioning, right? But also, you know, I remember in the beginning in my journey, you know, my devotion to my teacher was so strong that even after coming from India, and I had to look at his picture every day, I had to read Ramana's writings, I had to really, you know, the devotion kept, you know, its momentum for a while in that particular way, right? And then at some point, all that just fell away. And it's interesting that only when I would experience a challenge with being with what is, I would try to reach back into that, you know, Papaji thing, right? Because it's a thing. It's not because the state is what it is, right? It's real, right?
Yeah.
So, but I would notice only when there was a challenge with being here, I would reach into like, oh, you know, Papaji. It's like, what is that, right? There's no such a thing, you know. I mean, that's here, right? So that's why I say that's the past. Immediately throw it out. You know, the moment that arises, like, oh, it used to be easier. Now that's a story. Cut it right there, because that's only create more. That's only going to create more suffering. Right?
Yeah. Thank you. That's so beautifully clear.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so right on the spot. Yeah. So Neelam, there's another. I'm aware that Maya actually made another comment, but I think that's been answered. I mean, you know, it's basically
Beautiful.
Reformulated what you said before. There's Ifta who asks, Neelam, do you experience a lot of thought movement? Or is it just changing? Sometimes lots of thought and sometimes not so much.
A lot of thought movement, you said?
Movement, yes.
You know, it arises, right? Thoughts happen, you know. There's no concern with that. You know what I mean? It's just another state that arises in presence. The only time there is concern is when that begins to become reality, right? When there's that hook going on, you know, like, oh, that seems to be very relevant. Suddenly in the midst of nowhere, because, see, everything arises in nothing, right? So thoughts arise in nothing, and body arises in nothing, and everything arises in nothing. But then there are times that suddenly in the middle of nowhere, there's the relevance. That is really important, right? And what the learning has been here is that when that happens, which Papaji used to call it thinking, he used to say like this: even while you are thinking, don't even in the midst of thought, don't think. See? So when there is here this relevance, you know, like something is really important, and that reflects in that suddenly the thoughts are important, suddenly the feelings are important, suddenly the sensations are important. So in the midst of that, then what has been here, the experience is to realize that that's a reflection of a state, of an inner state that has not been met. That something happened, some movement away from presence. Did it happen now? Did it happen yesterday? Did it happen a millions of years ago? It doesn't matter. But there is some state here that has not been met, you see. And so there has been the practice of, you know, when I say inquiry, the practice of the willingness to say, okay, can I be present to that state rather than just engage in the importance of thought, you know? Because other than that, thoughts as I said, they just are, you know, like everything else. It just arises, right? But this, when it starts to cook a little bit, it's like, okay, can I be here? Right? Because that's a reflection of what hasn't been met before. Can I be here?
Actually, it's interesting because you know, it's very obvious when people have kind of obsessive thinking.
Right, right.
You know, that there's something that gives rise to that, and usually when they're able to when they're willing and able to just feel what gives rise to the obsessive thinking, it has a tendency of dying down and stopping eventually.
Right, right.
But we don't usually think that even with, you know, more normal levels of thinking, that even then it's possible to go to the state that's there, to the feeling that's there, the sensation.
Yeah. And I want to say the meeting of the state is so essential, right? Because if we really strip it down, you know, I talk a lot in my programs about the brain and the nervous system and how it works, because I find the understanding of it helps us, because that's the vehicle we have. You know, we learn about it more. It helps us to be present. But eventually, no matter how advanced whatever that word is, however long, what your realization is, it doesn't matter. You know, it's like what remains challenging is meeting of the state that is here. And the meeting of it is so subtle because it's not mental, it's not emotional, it's not, you know, in any explanation, it's not in any cause or reason or content. It's just, can I be present to this? Whatever it is, can I hold that? Can I, you know, can I hold that? Because here it is, it's arising, you know. And that's what needs meeting, right? Because obviously it wasn't met before. That's the only reason why it comes. It comes because it wasn't held before. It wasn't held in that recognition of presence, right? It wasn't held. And it needs that holding. So our, you know, because, you know, thoughts, I wouldn't pay any attention, see. When you ask about thoughts, like, you know, who cares, right? What's the thing, you know, with like whatever arises, right? Whatever, you know. But are you hooked into that? That's what I will pay attention to. You see, are you really following? Are you believing it? Are you following it? That's what I will pay attention to, because that's the trouble. You know, thoughts themselves, you know, it's just no trouble at all.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Good. Beautiful. Yes, of course.
So, Neelam, I don't see any other questions right now.
Beautiful.
Unfortunately, there's always... Sorry?
That means we are done, right, with questions for now? That's good.
I think so, yeah, and I think it's also getting time to stop.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
you know, even since we started later, it's kind of, you know, it's getting late. So unfortunately, there's a bit of a time lag between when people post questions and when they show up on the comment thread. So I'm just going to check one more time.
Refresh. This is the trouble with the internet. You know, we all believe it's so powerful and perfect.
I'm sorry, Neelam, I didn't catch that.
I said this is the trouble with the internet, you know, which we believe, or is it our belief, that, you know, it's so powerful and so perfect and it works, you know, and it's just like everything else, right?
Yes, yes. I mean, it's beautiful in the immediacy that it does allow, you know, and the fact that we can actually really allow people to participate more fully than, say, in a recorded conversation or you know, there's the seeing which is involved, which is not there when there's a phone call. So it has its beautiful aspects, but it's not perfect. And when Mercury is retrograde, obviously, you know, there are some problems that arise. Yeah. So I think we'll leave it there. Thank you to everybody for being willing to wait and go to the new link and find the new hangout. And thank you for your questions, for your participation, and thank you so much, Neelam. I feel we just scratched the surface, but But, you know,
maybe some other time. Yeah, maybe some other time. Who knows?
Yes. Who knows? Yes.
And it's so nice to meet you, Grace. It's so nice to meet you. You know, that's so nice, and everybody, of course, also. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's been wonderful meeting you, and I just want to say, if people want to connect with Neelam, you find her details. Her website is neelam.org. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you know, if you'd like to try out, has some free calls also that she offers. So if that speaks to you and interests you, please follow that up. Yeah, thank you, Neelam.
Thank you so much. So I appreciate you. Thank you for doing this. Very appreciate that.
Very happy to meet you. And I'll just go into my closing spiel, and then I'll say goodbye to you after Neelam. So you've been watching the last conversation before the summer of Living from Love, which is a series of conversations. I'll probably be continuing with more conversations towards the end of the summer in August or early September. And I'm also considering organizing another live online retreat in the fall. So if you'd like to know about these things and you're not signed up to the newsletter, please sign up to the newsletter on living-from-love.com, and you'll get all the news about what's going to happen in the future. And so here's wishing you well. I hope the how-tos, Neelam's how-tos, will continue to be useful as a tool that you can use. And we'll see you sometime soon. Bye-bye.